Hello everybody. So as we are just waiting for everybody to join the webinar today on communicating your science to non-scientists, I'd love it if you could use the chat feature just to introduce yourselves. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Zoom, the chat feature allows you to post messages either to myself and Anne as your panelists, or there's also the drop down option with a little arrow there where you can send your chat message to the panelists and attendees. So please do let us know where you are joining us from in the world today. It looks from our registrations that we've had people register from all over the world. Hi Daniela from Berlin, nice to see you with us today. We've got Shreya from India, a beginner to SciComm. Welcome along, lovely to have you with us. Annie's here from London. We've got Grace from the USA, Egypt represented, Portugal, Argentina, Italy. Look, amazing. Look, Anne, it's brilliant. Lots of people joining us today from all over the world.
Lovely.
And hello to Alan, who's in Wales, which is where I am today. Nice to see you. So we are just going to wait a few more moments for everybody to join us and get connected to our webinar today, in case anybody has any kind of slight technical issues, because we all know with the way the world is at the moment, technical issues are problematic, aren't they? So we'll just give people a few more moments. Hello, Gabrielle in France, Roberta's in Italy. And we've got people from Brazil. Pedro's joining us from Brazil. Hello. So lots of people, it'll be different times of day all around the world, won't it? So in Cardiff, where I am in Wales, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've just had my lunch. Perhaps some of you are having breakfast, who knows? Maybe.
Might be that some people are actually having a drink already. It's evening.
Maybe, yeah, who knows? Let us know. It might be that time.
I'm drinking some water.
Yeah, I'm on some iced tea, having just had lunch. We've got the Ukraine represented. We've got somebody joining us from North Macedonia as well. Hello to you. It's dinner time in Indonesia. Thank you, Vinda. Thank you for letting us know. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, and then we've got somebody. Oh, it's Alan having a tuna sandwich on the patio, because it is lovely in Cardiff, I have to say. I hope it's as nice weather as it is here with you. I can see, Anne, that we have kind of stabilized in terms of participants. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. We really appreciate that. It's great to know that we've got people joining us from all over the world today. I'll just introduce myself firstly. I'm Emma Yhnell, as you've heard. I'm joining you from Cardiff in Wales in the UK today. And I'm going to be chairing this session, talking a little bit with Anne about my experiences in science communication and hopefully giving you some top tips so you can start your own kind of science communication journeys. Anne, did you just want to introduce yourself briefly? I know we're introducing ourselves a bit more later.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm Anne van der Jeugd, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today. And it's my second event with FENS since I became the Leuven Brain Institute program manager in October last year. So I actually recently switched jobs from pure research to research communication. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Great to have you with us today with that expertise in terms of switching careers as well. And hopefully you can see the slides on the screen. So this webinar is organised as part of FENS Friday and kindly supported by the Dana Foundation. So let's kick off with the format of today's session. So today's session is about 90 minutes long. We will be covering lots of kind of basics of science communication, why science communication is important or why we think it is, although views on that may vary. We'll cover some content on how to identify your audience and different types of audience. Then we will talk a little bit about format because there's loads of different formats that science communication can take. And then finally, we'll answer some queries and cover some content on actually running science communication events, how you might fund those and the organisations that you might be able to go to. And then finally, we will be having quite a significant amount of time on questions and answers. We're very keen to make this as interactive as possible. And many of you have kindly already submitted some questions. But if you do have any questions during this webinar today, you should be able to see the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. There's two little kind of speech bubbles. And if you do have any questions, please post them in there and we will be able to get to them later, hopefully. So that is the format today's session is going to take. I just wanted to spend a few moments introducing myself a bit more. So you've heard a little bit about me already, but I think it's sometimes useful to be able to understand the angle people are coming from. So I started off in my scientific career, if you like, back in 2012 when I graduated with my first degree in biochemistry. Then I ventured over into the wonderful world of neuroscience, completing a PhD in Huntington's disease. And then I was lucky to get a fellowship translating some of my science into the patient clinic. So I'm a scientist who was really lucky to be able to work with people affected by brain disease. And then in more recent times, I started a lectureship in 2019. And my lectureship has lots of teaching, but also lots of science communication. So I come at this from the angle of somebody who's been in the lab, but also in the patient clinic and lecturing as well. So that's how I kind of come at things and my background. And I'm just going to throw over to Anne to tell you a bit about her background.
Yeah, so thank you, Emma. And my story is a bit similar. So besides my PhD in behavioral neuroscience, I also actually hold a bachelor in journalism, which might explain my interest in communicating sciences and telling stories in an engaging way. And I also was a lab rat for 14 years, and I decided to switch to research management recently. So in my previous mandate as a postdoctoral fellow, working at the KU Leuven, I took part in several science outreach activities myself. And now in my new position, I try to convince the institute members in doing the same. And I organize and coordinate science outreach activities. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, perhaps. A bit more about myself. In this next slide, you can normally see my family. It's not showing, I think.
Oh.
Ah, there you have it. Okay, so this is my family. So I'm very glad that my husband actually followed me after when I defended my PhD. This is the Arenberg Castle in the background, so where I defended my PhD in 2014. And 6 months later, I went to Australia for my first postdoc. And one of my friends, who has a local newspaper, asked me to keep a journal about my whereabouts abroad, because I come from a small rural village in Flanders. So people were very interested in seeing how research was in Australia and life in Australia in general. I think that was the official start of my science communication activities. And later on, I will tell you more about my journeys in SciComm, but now I give back the word to Emma.
Brilliant, thank you, Anne. And just to pick up on a question that we've had in about whether this will be available on demand, we are recording and I'm reliably informed that this will be available and we can certainly arrange the link to be sent out to you all if that would be useful. But let's delve in to the content of today's webinar by asking the important question for this webinar: what is science communication? So science communication is a term which is used quite readily, but it means different things, I think, in different contexts. And some people refer to this in different ways. Public engagement is another term that people sometimes use. The public understanding of science, all sorts of different terms. But if you actually look at the definition of science communication, it comes up as the practice of informing, educating, raising awareness of science-related topics, and increasing the sense of wonder about scientific discoveries and arguments. So if we unpick this a little bit, there's lots of different kind of layers, if you like, to science communication. And I've certainly noticed in my current job, in terms of doing lots of teaching and education, that my skills in science communication and making science accessible and interesting have certainly helped. particularly in my background of working with patients in the clinic. Raising awareness of research and scientific topics has been useful as well. So from the registration form, I know that we've got lots of people joining us today with lots of different backgrounds, many of whom are scientists, perhaps starting off in their careers, maybe a bit more advanced in their careers. But I think science communication is important at every stage of your career. And I hope from this definition, you might be able to apply it to your specific area of expertise. And when we talk about science communication, I think it's important for lots of different reasons. So I touched on teaching, and teaching is an interesting skill set in that I feel my science communication certainly helps in my teaching, in that when I teach, I include things like demonstrations and interactive elements. And really, teaching is about conveying a message or content clearly so that your audience, in my case, students, are able to understand that information. I mentioned patient awareness as well. So particularly for me, working in the field of Huntington's disease, a neurodegenerative condition, I really wanted to raise patient awareness of that condition. It became really apparent to me working with patients, many of them weren't aware of some of the science behind their condition. And often that wasn't through lack of trying, it was because the information available perhaps wasn't written or presented in the most appropriate way so that they could access that. And that's really important in terms of research as well. So I've certainly found things like recruitment to clinical trials can be enhanced if you communicate the science effectively. The interesting topic of the public awareness and understanding of science, which I think has been more relevant than ever, perhaps in a very general way, and how we tell people about our science, but science in general. For me, there's a big element of inspiring other people. So I'm really keen on getting people involved in science communication so that we can overcome some of the stereotypes associated with science and research. And finally, I think it's about improving diversity so that science and research becomes more diverse in general as well. So I think often people think of science communication, they think of the kind of immediate giving someone a message or conveying some information, but actually when you unpick the layers of science communication, I think it can be really beneficial on all sorts of different levels. So the follow-up question, I guess, once we've unpicked what science communication is it important? And as somebody who's done science communication for a while now, probably about 10 years or so, I think it should be said that different people will have different views on this. So you can probably guess that Anne and I probably have similar views on this question, that we recognise that science communication is important, but different people will have different views. And I think that's important to recognise. For me, science communication's great because it can provide people with transferable skills, the ability to be able to clearly and concisely communicate a message in a way that perhaps is entertaining to an audience is an incredible skill. I work with students a lot as well in terms of employability. And actually, many of the students that I've worked with have used the skills that they've developed in terms of science communication for job interviews, for example. And I think there's a huge amount of confidence which can be developed when people undertake science communication. Also worth noting that funders require science communication now. You have to be able to communicate your message. That may well be to different audiences, but it's often required in things like funding bids. And also it can be really enjoyable. I don't think we should underestimate that. So I have got a lot of enjoyment out of my science communication activities over the years. And that is something that I think we should recognise, with the caveat that it is a lot of hard work. It does take significant resource, and we'll come on to funding later. But it can be very enjoyable, but it does need to be kind of recognised in that sense. So I dug out some stats for you all in relation to this survey, which is a UK-based survey. It's the Public Attitudes to Science survey. This is a survey that's done every few years in the UK, taking a random sample of the population and looking at how they feel about science. So what their attitudes are, and just how they feel about science as a topic very, very generally. And this latest survey was published in 2019. And I've picked out some really key information in terms of demographic, gender, education, age, and ethnicity. So for me, I really want to understand what the general public perception is to be able to tailor my science communication. So some key themes for you are that women were less likely to feel informed about science. And I think that's a really interesting point, because we find or tend to find that science communication activities do tend to be biased towards women doing them. But despite this, women feel less informed about science. Perhaps they don't see themselves as scientists. Interestingly, in terms of education, people with lower levels of education were less likely to feel knowledgeable, trusting, or connected about science. There's an interesting age split here. So people over the age of 65 generally feel less likely to be informed about science, but the younger age categories, the 16 to 34-year-olds, feel more informed about science. But taking that down another age group, 16 to 24-year-olds, were more negative than older age groups about careers in science. So for me, there is that broader theme of careers, inspiring other people, and role models. And then finally, in terms of ethnicity, the data was small in terms of people who didn't identify as white, but there were a small number of people who identified as BAME, and they said that their views generally were more positive about science than their white counterparts. So I've got some graphs for you because, you know, scientists love graphs, don't they? So this is a word cloud, just picking out the key themes that people associated with science, the key words when people were asked, okay, what do you associate with science? And lots of these themes fall back to the science they learned at school, your biology, chemistry, and physics. But there are some really interesting words here around laboratories, health, understanding interventions as well. Perhaps the more interesting data looks at people feeling well-informed or fairly well-informed about scientific topics. So this graph compares the 2019 data to the 2014 data. Top of the list is vaccination, which I think is particularly important at the moment, clearly. But many people felt in this survey fairly well informed about vaccination, but it is decreasing based on subsequent years. And there are some other really interesting topics here, genome editing, for example, artificial intelligence, which are gaining so much traction in terms of science generally. When we look at where people hear about scientific research findings most often, again, you've got the 2014 data in purple and the 2019 data in blue. News TV programs come up quite highly, but that is decreasing based on the previous year. Something that is increasing more and more are online forms of communication, and we are going to touch on that today in terms of offering you some top tips. Something that has gone down quite a lot is the print publications and newspapers. But you'll see something that has increased is the use of Facebook in particular and social media. So I think it's really interesting to have a think about the types of formats that people are using when they get their scientific information. Okay, over to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting already here. And I got a question, or more like a comment, or even a compliment in the chat from Shreya from India. And she says, research management sounds amazing. And actually it is. So before I was doing research, and now I can actually combine the two things. So for me, both things are two sides of the same coin, actually, doing research and communicating about it. So now today I will explain you some science, again, behind the science communication. Maybe next slide, please. Yeah. So yeah, keeping an audience engaged can be very difficult, as you know, and especially when you have mixed audiences. For instance, if you do a science activity, and the main reason is that children and young people rarely come along because they're accompanied by their parents or grandparents even, or teachers. So you have to know how to adapt your approach to appeal to these different age groups. And it's a crucial skill when organizing science communication activities. So maybe next slide, please. The first group is the children. And as a rough guide, I say like children, they just starting in primary school, they have only a focus of about, I think, 10 minutes or so. And by the time that they go to secondary school, they can pay attention for closer to 30 minutes. So this means if you're organizing something, the younger your audience, the more interactive activities you need to keep them engaged. And a great way, for instance, to inspire the children is to appeal to their senses. You can create a workshop or bring in a piece of your lab equipment. And this helps to generate an experience that will make more of an impact than words alone. For an example, on this picture you see here, this is for my interactive workshop, the Smell Challenge. And this was in a true Sound of Science festival in Antwerp. Over 500 kids, I think, attended it. And I think approximately 100 came to my workshop that day. So first of all, made a simple chalkboard drawing to attract their attention and to spark their curiosity, saying the Smell Challenge, how many smells can you guess? Come inside and find out. So, and then the children who wanted to participate, they got blindfolded, by my daughter actually. This was really helpful because my daughter had the same age of them. So she was my assistant for the day, and she then also presented them the smells. So when they were blindfolded, they had to guess the smells of different products like coffee, mint, chocolate. But also, of course, used some smelly things like stinky cheese, garlic, and other things to make it a bit funny. Then they had to write down what they smelled, and I scored their performance. And I explained a bit about how our brains processes the smells and how older people, for instance, with memory deficits, have problems with this. So I tried to avoid difficult terms and terminology like Alzheimer's disease. And of course, very important is that afterwards they get some cool gadgets, like fluorescent vests or wristbands or buttons, and even a sniff certificate with their name on it so they can take something home. Yeah, the next slide, if you move a bit older. So there you have the teenagers, and it's a good age group because a survey thing from 2008, they showed that 2/3 of young people are highly interested in technology and science. So this can be very helpful because then they will pay more attention and it can be a bit more interactive for them. So again, related to my own activity, I first gave a 20-minute lecture about the brain, about rodent research also, and how olfaction can help us in unraveling neuroscience problems like Alzheimer's disease. And I actually used like snippets from the movie Finding Dory. So I tried to sneak in some interactive elements too. And the next I invited 3 kids on stage to take part in a small demonstration. And also there they were blindfolded. And so their classmates could see them on the stage, and which was very entertaining for the group and the teachers also. Then I scored their performance. And we also did some statistics even by comparing the individual differences and everything. And finally, of course, very important, the kids at this age group, they can ask really questions about my research. Some of the questions were like, how can mice and animal testing help us finding a solution for dementia? Or how do you get Alzheimer's mice? Next slide for the older age bracket. Yeah, this was like when they were asking questions. So it was like, I think 150 kids here in this room. Lots of energy. Yes. So this was done with my adult group. So for adults, it's a bit different because the older age bracket may seem like it should be an easier win, but actually there are different challenges. So you will probably find that anyone past retirement age will come with a willingness to listen to you, of course. But sometimes the worldview is a bit more set in stone than your younger audiences. So you will need to be both clear and very convincing if you want to shake off some of the myths or misconceptions that have been drilled into them for the past years. So for instance, back in the days, science was different than what is taught now to youngsters. Also terms like AI or DNA may not be so evident to a more mature audience. So related to my own activities, I gave a Pint of Science lecture last year, just before the lockdown, about science and also the gender gap in science. Like you mentioned, Emma, women also feel less connected to science. It's a bit like the role model thinking, so you can't be what you can't see. And I also like this Pint of Science concept. It's really cool. So for people that don't know it, you can come into the pub and you get a free beer and you can then present your research for 40 minutes to the audience. So I started first with a funny quiz, asking the audience if they knew Marie Curie, but then I actually showed a picture of Mariah Carey, just so that I could actually get their laughs and people feel more comfortable. And then next I explained a bit how the smells that can trigger memories, so strong that you feel like you've been transported back into time. I think everybody knows this feeling, especially older people. And then also explained how the sniff test can be used as a tool for diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And in the end, of course, here also people can ask questions. And sometimes also I feel this can be really confronting. For instance, if they're talking about a partner who died of the disease, but actually also sometimes it's very rewarding because they often say also that they were very happy to come outside and to see other caretakers in a non-clinical setting. Another example you see on the right side is the soapbox science concept. And normally I think this is always done outside, but now due to COVID, of course, it was streamed live from inside. Here also I try to relate my findings to the current situation. So I explained a bit of the effects of social distancing or social isolation on memory and mental health. And also brought some props like a plastic brain and a mouse to explain my research. So to conclude, old or young, a general public audience wants above to be inspired and entertained. And you have to think about what excites you the most about your work and then build it into a talk which is suitable for your audience. And I would just say, like, you really have to enjoy it. I get so much energy from it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah. So now some...
just briefly jump in, because I love the fact that you've kind of drawn out the main audiences that you've worked with, which is amazing. And sometimes it can be really difficult, can't it? Because you maybe don't know who your audience is. You may be going in cold. So I think, you know, the really nice way you presented it, building it up, you know, at that level, so that you're kind of trying to cater for everybody is a really nice way of doing it.
Yeah, it's a bit, sometimes it's like very mixed audiences, but then you have to adapt it sometimes on the spot. But so now I will share some tips and tricks to make it for every type of audience very interactive. So first of all, you want to draw your audience in, like you said. So the form should fit the audience indeed. And if you're presenting a research poster to the general public, then you've lost the battle before it starts already. So you have to think about what your options are that are available for you. So for instance, a live demonstration, a video, a hands-on exercise. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. The goal is always to engage, and people don't find posters and classical slide presentations particularly engaging. So a good example is to already start interaction at the start of your event. For instance, ask the audience or the readers even, if it's a written piece, a rhetorical question like, did it ever happen to you that you come into a room and you suddenly realize that the smell reminds you of something from your childhood? Or have you ever thought in another topic about how birds navigate and find their way home? It can also be a more philosophical question like, what would you genetically change about humans to make them a better species? Or you can also start by stating a problem in the end of your, stating a problem in the beginning of your presentation. For instance, like air pollution is indeed a crisis, but it's a crisis we can solve. How do you think we could solve this problem? So it's a bit like more, you make them actually think and start spark this curiosity in their minds. And then you can go on to the next step. We have to break it down and blow it up. So that means simplifying. For instance, when kids are your primary audience, they don't need to learn about all the nitty-gritty details of your research methodology to learn about things, but they just want to be inspired. So you have to zoom out and think about the key details about your topic and that you'd like your audience to interact with, and cut the rest, really. So in practice, this means focusing on more on your study systems and less on your experiments and findings. There are so many things, like you don't have to give your poster title to your same presentation title. For instance, if you give a workshop about bees, you can just call it all about bees or something like this. Not about the mineral preferences of honeybees when foraging for water. I mean, it's too complicated. Just stay simple. And also here interesting is like if your study system is very small, you need to think big again. So as a scientist, you might be quite comfortable with the microscopic or even subatomic level, but be honest, was that true when you were a kid? I don't think so. So put yourself in the shoes of a child and think bigger. So for instance, you can use microscopes to let kids discover what different parts of the bees look like at 100 magnification, or you can use macro photography to blow up like the eyes and the stinger of the bees. So you can have many ideas, and always a good idea is to visit your local science museum and see which exhibits are like crowd pullers, crowd favorites, and then you can use some tips and tricks for that. As a third example, I also try to engage the senses. So not everybody is an auditory or visual learner. So yeah, this is especially true with kids. They're learning in different ways. So it's always a good idea to communicate in different ways. For instance, is there a hands-on activity you can use as a demonstration? Yeah. Try to mix up your auditory and visual stimuli, as well as by introducing a sound or something that surprises people or captivates their attention. So yeah, for instance, you can also let your public pipetting and learn how microscopes work. This actually creates like a true lively experience that they take home, and they will remember this for a long time. This is the part actually that will stick in their minds, not the lecture itself. So you have to speak always. Yeah, this was actually the third part. You have to speak their language and use analogies also, because to be honest, kids, they don't speak jargon. So neither should you when you communicate with kids or the general public in general. So nothing turns off a child faster than the overusing of words that are unfamiliar to them. Also unfamiliar, is inaccessible, right? Really. So it's like the opposite that you're trying to achieve. Keep it really simple. And a good tip is always to practice your lecture or your activity with a family member who is not a scientist by trade. So there will be a great at catching that you are using jargon that is not kid friendly. Also very interesting is that you go to YouTube and you look at influencers, how they use some kind of words, like the terminology that is now hip among kids. For instance, the hypes like unboxing or challenging. So this is why I call my workshop the smell challenge, that it's like related to their YouTube movies. So also association is very powerful. You can relate your subject to something that your audience already is familiar with, and then you help to build a connection to what you're trying to communicate. People love it because when you help them get in, actually by relating your topic to something they know, it makes them feel smart because in a way they already understand the concept you're trying to attempt to convey. So you have to be very smart with your analogies. For instance, if you're a chemist, you maybe swap out the Thomson plum pudding model for the chocolate chip ice cream model. So some great tips. And finally, I also give away like a goodie bag because people like it when they get something to take home. Your take-home item can be something that you actually make during a workshop with the audience. It doesn't have to be, of course. Even something as a cheap, like a button or a sticker is already something great. And it can actually create a memorable experience for a child. So think a bit about like marketing and think about branding your science communication activity. So making a hashtag is also very useful. And then you can customize it and brand it, like making fluorescent vests and wristbands. Because actually also one size fits all. So it always fits for everybody, a wristband and a fluorescent vest. And this way you can also have a longer impact, and literally increase your research topic visibility. So I think, I said everything I wanted to say.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, this is the takeaway things. So these are a few things that I had made the past years for my workshops. And you can still then see people wearing it when they come into the workshop the year after. So it's really cool that they then bring their younger siblings and everything. So
people love a freebie, don't they, Anne?
Yes, I also do it.
Yes, yeah, we all do, don't we? And I think that really nice tip about, practicing things with people who maybe don't have that background in science. So my top tip is my mum, bless her. My mum is wonderful, but has no background in science. So if my mum doesn't understand it, then I need to kind of rethink it a bit, maybe. So I wanted to pick up now on some different types of formats, because we've covered this and Anne's really nicely covered some different formats, but I wanted to be really open about this because science communication can take so many different formats. And sometimes I feel like if people are starting off in science communication, they maybe are understandably a bit scared or a bit nervous. So I want to just run through some different formats so that we can consider them. So this image is meant to represent the kind of more traditional print media, which is a good way of accessing different groups and quite a broad target audience. However, less people are reading these kind of typical print medias nowadays. This picture just represents me going into a school, doing some DIY brain surgery, talking to kids about the brain in health and disease. So a really good way of doing a hands-on activity, but clearly in COVID context, a bit more tricky. You have got the more typical posters at scientific conferences, but again, think of the audience that they're trying to reach. Your typical academic poster is really aimed at the scientific audience, isn't it? So always remember the audience and tailor your formats appropriately. Social media, you can't get away from social media nowadays, can you? So lots of different social media. Some I'm more familiar with than others. I will admit that I haven't ventured into TikTok. Maybe some of you have. I don't know. Maybe I'm just old.
It will get better when you get, like, the kids are that age.
Maybe. But yeah, loads of different formats. You've got YouTube. I know Anne mentioned videos. Public speaking as well. Lots of people are really scared and maybe put off by public speaking. And I was originally, but now I do lots of public talks. And I still get nervous, but it goes away with time. But the reason I put this all out there is because I want you to present your science in a format that's comfortable to you. So I don't want anybody to ever feel in a position where they are uncomfortable. So if, you know, writing is your thing, present your science in maybe a more of a traditional print format. If you like making videos, then maybe videos your thing. So absolutely challenge yourself, put yourself out there, but don't ever feel uncomfortable. You need to feel comfortable in the first instance. So I wanted to briefly touch on going online. You know, we're online today, aren't we? And it has lots of benefits. You know, we have got hundreds of people from all around the world logging in, which is amazing. But going online does present some challenges as well. So firstly, remember your audience. I said this lots. It's a key theme, isn't it, Anne? Always remember your audience. That might be obvious. You know, it might be school children, university students. You might not be aware. So if you're invited to do something, don't be afraid to ask the organizer, okay, so who do you envisage your audience being? How is this being promoted? So that you can modify appropriately. A top tip that I learned over the years is, what is your message? What one thing or maybe two things do you want your audience to go away and remember? And Anne gave some really nice examples of really interactive things. And I think we've all had that maybe unfortunate experience of sitting through a lecture or a presentation that is quite dry and maybe a little bit boring. So we want to make our science communication interactive and engaging. So if you can tell a story, give an anecdote, do a demonstration, that will just make your presentation different in somebody's mind. So, you know, I gave a lecture the other day on the autonomic nervous system and the pupillary reflex, and looking at how the pupil, the size of the pupil changes. And I did a live demonstration of that in response to light. And hopefully my students will now remember that. It will help them with their exams, but you can do the same no matter what your audience. So do think about what message you want your audience to take away. Keep people engaged. I know this is so hard online. Our attention spans, I think, are shorter. We're spending all day online, aren't we? Well, I certainly am. I don't know about you. But when we are online a lot, you have to work harder to keep people engaged. So whether that's your tone, how fast or quickly you're speaking, mixing it up, having a real mixture of, you know, content, include breaks if possible so that people can ask questions, and keeping it interactive. And then finally, a little top tip about your setup. So in terms of your setup, your background, I know I do have some things in my background, but try not to make it too distracting. You don't want your audience to be distracted by your background. Make sure things like your audio and your camera are working. If you're using a laptop, plug it in to charge. You don't want your battery going flat halfway through your wonderful presentation. So yes, just some top tips in terms of your setup. Okay, over to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you. So in this part, I will give you some information about science communication activities. So this year, I organized several activities for the Brain Awareness Week campaign, which is a global campaign to foster the public's enthusiasm and to support brain causes. So every March, different partners, they can host activities in their communities to share the wonders of the brain. But of course, due to the COVID pandemic, it had to go virtual this year. So I tried to choose for different approaches, targeting different audiences. For instance, on the left side, you can see for the older age groups, I organized 2 lectures in the evening about the brain and mental health. And also I tried to sneak in some interactive parts, like a live demonstration on the left bottom. You can see a person there doing this workshop where he has to monitor his breathing. And then you can see the stress levels going up. So this was really entertaining for the audience. I think we had almost 100 people there attending for 1 hour, so it was really good. A different thing that I organized was for the children again, the workshop. So you can see there also the picture in the lower part. And then, of course, I also try to go viral. So that means asking my social media followers to post pictures. In this case, I used a simple banana. It was on Wednesday, actually, because in Belgium, then we have on school, you cannot give any candy to your kids to school, but you have to give fruits. So I decided to give a banana, and I wrote a fun fact about the brain on it. And I saw immediately when I posted it, so on my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, that people, so also with the hashtag, of course, Brain Awareness Week, that people started sharing it. Also people that are never aware of this Brain Awareness Week. So people started sharing the bananas. And after, in the evening, when I checked my Facebook, my whole Facebook was like covered with bananas with fun facts on it. So it was really cool. So something easy and really like low threshold, minimal investment, but this returned really a maximum of output. So it's really amazing. The final slide, maybe some funding bodies. So there are some national funding bodies. So for instance, in Belgium, I guess also in other countries, you have like the Royal Arts Academy. They also support science communication. You can get grants for that. Of course, we have that in the FENS, so the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. They're organizing this Brain Awareness Week, which you can get a brain awareness grant to support your activities and to buy the gadgets. You also have other funding about, like for instance, it's a bit more difficult to get. It's called European Researchers Night from the EU. I actually managed to get this grant, so it was confirmed. Yeah, thank you. Last week, I did it not alone. I'm actually the president also of Belgian Women in Science, and I have an amazing group of people, 7 partners also. So we're going to host different kinds of things, workshops during the day, of course, with children. It will be in the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences in Brussels, but also in the Royal Observatory, so stargazing. But in the evening also we have like a photo exhibition with portraits of female scientists. And we have also music and cocktails, of course, and a movie night about the movie Proxima. You might have heard about it. It's about a woman who goes into space flight, but she's then struggling because she has to leave her child for 3 months. So we have also a debate afterwards about women in space sciences. So it will be very interesting. It's 2 days in September. So if you can already mark it in your agendas, if you're able to attend it in Brussels, hopefully then we can do it live, of course. Otherwise you have to go virtual or semi-hybrid. So, but there are also underfunding schemes. For instance, from the universities, I think you can go. Often university also has some money that they can spend on science communication and outreach activities. Also, for instance, KU Leuven, they do the Day of Science every year. I think there are several festivals also out and about. So, for instance, Pint of Science is another initiative. Soulbook Science, Falling Walls Lab, you might have heard of it. I think the final was like in Berlin last year. Of course, TEDx, everybody knows about it, but it's difficult to get in. I also try to give a lot of, just like lectures for like service clubs, Rotary, Lions Club. There also you can get some money. So of course, if you then have like an NGO, for instance, I'm the president of BWISE, you can ask not money for yourself, but to support then the cause of your non-profit organization, which I think is a really good idea because then you can also support like other people doing science communication. So I think that's about it. There's not something really established already online, I think, that you can find everything because it's very diverse. It's really spread everywhere. So you have to be once you get started, you will see it. It will come. And you will often see the same people again and again in these science contests and science battles. So it's a bit difficult to give the best tips according to your country, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's worth saying, you know, funding is out there, and it's really important types of activities are funded. You know, particularly with the resources that you mentioned, Anne, around kind of freebies and things like that. They tend to be smaller pots of money than things like research grants, but particularly, you know, if you're maybe just starting out, or even if you're more advanced in your career, actually being successful in these grants for science communication can be really useful in terms of your CV and your career, because you can demonstrate that you're bringing money in and you're competitive in doing that, which is really
definitely
good.
I think it's a key part also if you're applying for an ERC grant also, science communication, for every grant, I think, nowadays. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So a really nice way of demonstrating that you can bring income in. So Pint of Science, I think, I think it's international, because I've taken part in that and gave a talk about the influence of alcohol on the brain. Soapbox Science as well, which is targeted towards women in science and trying to increase and enhance the profile of women in science. And on that note, it brings me on to some of our final slides, because I really wanted this webinar to be honest and to recognise some of the potential barriers that you might come across in terms of science communication activities, because I think it's worth recognising these, and in recognising them, hopefully we can help you to overcome them. So the first one that I want to acknowledge is time and resource. So, I mean, many of us are poor in terms of the time that we have available. And I think, sadly, because of that, science communication can sometimes fall to the bottom of our to-do lists. But it is very important. Sadly, because of the science communication activities that are happening, they can occur often on the evenings and weekends, which can be problematic, and it feeds into that problem with diversity. There are some people who aren't able to do those types of activities, so it does need to work for you. And also the recognition that it takes significant resource, both financial resource and, you know, your time, your energy and effort as well. So while science communication can be incredibly fun and rewarding, it is sometimes really hard work. And I think that does need to be recognised. And in recognising that, support from others, so whether that's your boss or your supervisor or your colleagues, I think in recognising the importance of science communication and other people supporting you in that can be really, really helpful. And I'll freely admit that hasn't always necessarily happened in all of the activities that I've done. When people back you and are on your side and really value the importance of it, then that can be really helpful. We touched on building confidence. And I think one of the really key issues when you're maybe starting off in the world of science communication is, I'm speaking to, 100 school kids about my research. Gosh, that is a real challenge. And I think over time, as you do more events, confidence does build. And it kind of gives you more and more confidence as you go along, I think. But being able to condense your research down and explain it to school children is one of the kind of key skills that I just think is so valuable, because if you can explain your PhD thesis to a classroom of 10-year-olds, then, the confidence that will give you is phenomenal. And then finally, overcoming imposter syndrome. So I guess it relates back to that confidence building, in that if you're giving a public talk in front of 500 people, that is terrifying. We can probably all agree, can't we, Anne, that is a scary prospect. And those thoughts of, gosh, somebody's going to ask me a question and out me, and all of those happen. And for me, for a long, long time, I had those thoughts, particularly around questions, because I guess they're the thing you can't really control. If you're giving a public talk, and there's always the possibility that an audience member will ask you some slightly kind of off the wall question, but it's absolutely okay to, in terms of your questions, just acknowledge that you don't know the answer. That's fine. I think we have a really big issue in science communication that the presenter knows everything, and we all know that we can't know everything about everything. So that's important. And also, you know, offer to have a chat with people afterwards as well. Sometimes certain members of the audience can maybe take the floor, which can be a shame for other audience members as well. So those are kind of my top tips. And I mentioned, you know, I want you to be comfortable. I want you to do your science communication in a format that you are comfortable with, but don't be afraid to be brave and push yourself as well from time to time. You know, give that public talk, because you'll learn from it and build your confidence. So with that, it is over to you with our Q&A. So as a reminder to all of you, you should have a question and answer button at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom toolbar. And that will allow you to post any questions that you had for us. While you have a few moments just to formulate any questions and pop them in the Q&A section, just wanted to thank you for coming today, but also to let you know that there are lots more webinars coming up as part of FENS Friday. We should say a huge thank you to the Dana Foundation, who have supported today's webinar. We will get through as many questions as possible, but I hope I'm not speaking for you here, Anne, but both Anne and I are happy for you to get in touch with us if you do have any kind of follow-up questions or anything you wanted to pick our brains about, really. And then finally, we've got more events, as I said, coming up. We touched on pitching your research in an online format today, but we do have a much more extensive session on this coming up at the beginning of May that you can register for. Registration is now open. It's going to be a very interactive session. So if you're maybe thinking about an idea, but you're not sure about it, please do come along and we'll be able to give you really constructive feedback on your pitches. So, oh, and also, how could I forget the FENS regional meeting, a prime opportunity to advertise this, which is coming up in August. So for all of this, please do go to the FENS website and you can find more information about all the great events and meetings that FENS has coming up. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we can have a bit of a discussion, maybe, Anne, about some of these questions. Actually, I'm going to go back maybe to the Q&A to just remind people that they can put their questions in there. So thank you to all of you who submitted your questions in your registration form. So we're going to kick off with some of those, and then I will try and answer the other questions that we've had live. So let's kick off, which Victoria has kindly posted a question from you all, which says, this is a really nice question, Anne, for you. How do we communicate neuroscience to people who have never heard about neuroscience?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the question.
I'll help you out. It's okay, don't worry.
No. I mean, how do you communicate neuroscience to people? So how do they actually end up in your event, or is it for a written piece? Or
oh, it's a good question. We don't know. I think this is more about, I guess, simplifying the content down to your target audience, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, there also I would use like an analogy and like try to explain things, but like a basic example that relates to daily life, I think, is a good way to start. Don't use too much difficult words, I would also say. For the rest, I mean, make it interesting. Like storytelling is already an art on itself, but I mean, if you can, it's also the same as writing like a paper. Eh? You have to get past the reviewers, so your story needs to be coherent. So also there, it's not about like, you don't have to lie or something, but it's about making the story more attractive. Like it's appealing to the general public. And actually neuroscience is cool, so I don't understand the problem here.
Yeah, I think we're a bit biased. Yeah, and actually as somebody who didn't actually start off in neuroscience, started off in kind of biochemistry. I think sometimes even the term neuroscience can be a bit off-putting. So I don't know about you, Anne, but sometimes when I talk to people and they say, what do you do? And I say, you know, I'm a neuroscientist. And
Actually, I say differently. I say, like, I can read your mind. I'm a behavioral psychologist, so I just thought like this to make this joke, and then I go about like what is happening in the brain, but I'm actually more investigating the biological processes behind things that we can observe in
I think brain
behaviors.
science, you know, I often go with
brain science, yeah, neuroscience, yeah, something like this.
Yeah, and I think it's really about going back to, you know, what do you want your audience to take away from it. And I think that storytelling that you mentioned, Dan, you know, we all love a story, don't we? So if you can incorporate that in somehow, I think that's a nice way to start off as well.
It's difficult sometimes if you go to like popularized magazines and then the journalists, they try to change a bit the story. They're looking for like a solution for Alzheimer's disease. Like you always have to be careful if you go like in these kind of magazines or newspapers. I mean, it's not lying, but you have to be very careful when you found a small part of the solution, that they don't blow it up, because then you will get telephones from people that want to go enroll in patient clinical trials. That also happens. So you have to be always very honest also.
Absolutely. And don't
definitely.
be afraid to ask about what's being put out there. If there's any direct quotes from you, ask to see them, because you don't want you know, your message being changed in any way, really. Okay, Shreya, thank you for your question. So this is a really interesting question, which I get a lot actually, around whether a PhD is necessary to be a science communicator. How do you think I could, as a science communicator, gain reliability among the crowds, perhaps without a PhD? So what do you think about that, Anne?
A PhD for me was like not necessary to do this job. I think the job I have now, of course, but I mean, you have to be an expert at least in something if you're communicating about it. So yeah, otherwise you don't feel confident about it. That's true. So it's a bit like it could. Specialization in something is good, of course, if you want to explain something clear, that you're 100% certain about what you're saying, but it doesn't have to be a PhD for sure.
I think it's really difficult because having a PhD does, and it shouldn't be this way, but does give you an amount of kind of credibility. But the irony is most PhD projects are in a very small niche question, right? So actually, you know, an opening up and answering much broader questions or things. So I don't think it's necessary to be a science communicator at all. But it is a question that comes up a lot. And, you know, I think some of the best science communicators I know don't have PhDs.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't think it's necessary, Shreya. Is our answer, isn't it, Anne? Probably. Okay, brilliant. Letitia, coming from Brazil. So hello to you over in Brazil. She coordinates Pint of Science over in Brazil and is asking how maybe they can diversify the audience. So she's finding that her audience are typically graduate students. How can she almost change that audience to make it more...
It's in the pub. It's in the pub. Come on. Who do you expect to go to the pub in the afternoon? No, it's depending, of course. But yeah, if it's Pint of Science, I think, free beers is appealing to that age category. It's depending on which city you are, I think. Because when I did it in Leuven, I think my crowd was like 30 and older. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's relevant for the Pint of Science, but for other maybe things, it's difficult, of course, to get people. Some audiences are harder to reach for sure.
I might look at the way it's advertised, perhaps. And you know, your speakers, and maybe if you could get your speakers to maybe put it on their social media, that might help diversify it. But also, you know, don't be too hard on yourself. You're running an awesome event,
it's awesome
out there, so that's really good as well. So a question about transparency and how transparent you should be, particularly maybe with younger groups. And I read in lots of the questions that were submitted to us about more kind of sensitive topics.
Animal research, for instance, animal testing. I know, very hard. You have to be very careful with what you show, of course. So, for instance, related to my research field, it was rodent models, so that is quite okay. But I guess if you're putting electrodes in a monkey's brain, I don't think it's appropriate to show it to the general audience. It might get tricky sometimes. So, but of course, there also you have to be honest, and you have to say that it's for the greater cause, right? That you're doing it, and you have to show actually that you're just regular people testing these things in animals. So that already is something that you are confident about talking about it, right? That you don't in like the ivory tower and shy away from this. So I think, yeah, it's difficult also if you're having a family reunion and you have to explain what your job is about, of course, animal testing. Yeah, it's difficult, sensitive topics. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of organisations who've been set up to kind of combat this. So Understanding Animal Research is an example.
EARA is called, I think, in Europe, EARA. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head there, and about being honest and, open about that and being aware of that. And tackling that in a sensitive way. So sensitive topics around disease as well. And you mentioned when you're covering a topic around disease, I think you've got to prepare that talk knowing that there may well be people in the audience who are affected either directly or indirectly by that condition or disorder.
Always. Often they're the most interested in coming to the lectures, of course.
Absolutely.
It goes both ways. That happened also to me when I was doing my smell challenge in another school. And after the workshop, so just a basic workshop where I do a little bit of explanation about what happens in the brains of people with dementia. After the workshop, one of the children, like I think she was aged like 7, came to me crying that her grandmother was forgetting things. So it was really like, yeah, so you have to be, it's better to take them apart than and to do it not in the room where everybody's like there. But yeah, it happens, of course. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A question about virtual lectures and presentations, and particularly in this online environment, any recommendations to hold attention?
Yeah.
I've got some. Maybe if I'll.
Yeah, you can.
So I think there are lots of ways you can do this. So you can try and make some more interactive depending on your audience. So features like Zoom have those polls. You can use things like Mentimeter as well to add that interaction in. I sometimes do live demonstrations, which you do have to be a bit careful what works on a tiny screen, but also storytelling. So, telling people a story. So some of the talks that I've spoken about, for example, TEDx, about my kind of family history of Alzheimer's disease, I just had a huge picture of my grandparents on the screen and just spoke about that. So I think there are lots of ways to do it. Holding attention, I think, is the key thing there, isn't it? Because it's difficult in an online environment. It absolutely is. Also be aware of kind of what's on the screen, a mixture of maybe screen sharing and talking, and just be aware of how long your session is as well. And sometimes, you don't have to use a whole hour. If you've been allocated a whole hour and you want to split that into half an hour of talk, half an hour of questions, just, the question and answer session we have now, it just makes it a bit more interactive for everyone. Anything else, Anne, do you think?
No, sometimes it's good to just indeed split it up. Then just instead of talking 1 hour, I think it's not really necessary for science communication. No.
A question that you hopefully can answer about top tips around applying for grants specifically related to science communication. So anything especially worth mentioning? So target audience, activities, or budget?
So the one that I did now during the Christmas holidays was the European Researchers' Night, but it's in Europe only. This was like only science communication. So there I covered all these 3 things because it has to be like covered really in detail for the European Union. So it was like the audiences, you have to diversify, of course. You have to give a plan like how you will also reach them with promotional campaigns. For instance, for the children, we will do guerrilla marketing. I'm not really an expert in this, but my secretary from BYS is. So we're doing dances at the last day of school to get their children's attention. So, and we also do like this campaign where we fly a drone over the National Science Institute. And then we say like an alien has landed. And then we will have this campaign also on Twitter that people actually are like curious. So we give them a bit of a teaser. Then we build up this tension. So leading to the official event then in September. So it's like, a teaser, and then you give some things away. This is really interesting for a promotional campaign, and it's also low budget actually. For the rest, the budget, of course, is difficult, but I would invest the most in like good equipment, I think, for doing science communication. The gadgets is not really expensive. So it's only like 600 euros if you like have 50 people. But I mean, if you have like fluorescent vests or buttons, you can have like for 600 euro a lot. But I think you should invest in good equipment, like if you want to show movies, of course. Yeah, those things. Yeah. Brilliant. It's really it's difficult to explain now, but if you need tips and tricks, you can send me an email. I mean, yeah.
I think budget-wise, is it fair to say you think, Anne, that it will probably cost more than you anticipate?
Yes.
It's always the way, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Just picking up on Carly's
can I just mention something? Because I try to do also things like once you start building your science communication network, you can also get people doing things for free. For instance, by going to these science battles, I met other people, and some of them become really famous, like in national television. It's called like nerds and influencers. So they're famous on TV, and I just Friday I sent one of them an email. It's like, hey, remember me? Because I was once in your show doing something also for free. And now he can do like this. He will film it with his smartphone when he's like promoting my event in September. And he will share it with his followers, like 6,000 followers. So, sometimes you just have to dare to ask people to help you. And then you get, why not? Why not?
Yeah. And I think as well,
how do you say it?
It's fine to ask. Yeah.
And he was really like, immediately was like, yes, for sure I will do it. But can I get tickets to the event? I was like, of course you can get tickets for the event, Absolutely. Which is free, by the way. So, but sometimes, you just use your network or people that are also already good in science communication, and they will be happy to support your event or to distribute it on their social media, for sure.
Well, thank you. Just a reminder, folks, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A button, which is in the middle of your Zoom toolbar. Picking up on Carlo's question, which I think is a question that many people in the kind of virtual audience might have, is asking about the best advice for someone who's kind of just starting off maybe, and they want to lead a project, but they don't really have a lot of experience, and they're maybe a bit worried about whether they'll succeed or not.
So leading a project is like the management part, so you're not doing only the science communication yourself, but you're doing something with other people. So first of all, you have to get the people engaged also, and it can also be both ways. So if you're doing something yourself, find people that can help you. Don't try to do everything alone. That's a good advice. So for instance, if you're a postdoc or a PhD student, you can always ask your master students to join you on this science day or science event, and they can help you, like bringing the microscope, and also with this workshop. I did it, and it also looks good on their CV, so why not?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your comment earlier, don't be afraid to ask people.
Yeah.
And if they can't help, then that's okay too. And that worry about, whether you'll succeed or not.
Well, if you don't try it, you can never fail, I mean, just do it.
Right? But also, as scientists who apply for things, we're not always successful. That isn't necessarily a reflection on your idea or you. It's just the way it is sometimes. So don't be disheartened if you're maybe not successful the first time. And the other thing I'd say is that, I've had some absolute howlers and, problems with science communication where it hasn't maybe worked the way I intended, and I've kind of modified it on the spot. The audience might not have known that was happening, but, it's not always going to work first time. So, just be aware of that. A question about uncertainty in results and the fact that that's inherent to science. So how do we communicate that to the public, do you think, Anne?
I think now the COVID is a good example. Also on Belgian television, you can really see that science now is something that is not like, we're constantly learning new things about it, right? And scientists should be clear about it. That science is something that is evolving. So it's really something that you should be honest about, that we don't have all the answers, right? But science is like a process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a slightly odd public perception that science has all of the answers, and of course we know it doesn't, right? So I think
No.
it's good to
And also the technologies are I mean, like AI is now, like if you just told me like 20 years ago, I mean, now you cannot live without AI. I mean, deep learning networks. So there's always new stuff to discover. And I think, yeah.
Yeah. A topic that came out really clearly in the questions that we had submitted, and Catherine's also asked it live, is around the use of social media, which is a topic that we could probably talk about for 2 hours, really, couldn't we? But any top tips on the use of social media for science communication, and particularly around building your audience?
So if you want to go on the safe spot, you can create a hashtag with your, let's say, so not on a personal Twitter or account or Facebook, because sometimes then you get trolls. So it's very annoying. But if you want to go on the safe side, you can have an account with your workshop or your hashtag, your dedicated hashtag you invented. So then it's at least not you showing up. You have to convince all those trolls about your findings, because that often happens a lot. When I post some research results on there, then I always try to avoid saying it's done in rodents. So of course, then you get all these people against animal testing. So that's very difficult. So, but I mean, you just have to start having as many as followers as possible, of course. And that is often very difficult in the beginning. But if you can follow like research fellows, institutes, people in other countries that you meet at conferences, it can go really fast. I started the LBP Twitter account in October, and now we got, I think, over 2,000 followers already. So it's not impossible. You just have to be, if you also share something regularly. So it's not like just start an account and then neglect it. So you have to be really frequently posting things and retweeting, of course. For instance, on Twitter is easy. It's not a huge investment. Paper from other people also, but always give a special comment. So retweet with a quote, because just retweeting, I think, is boring. You have to always relate it to your own research, or give a personal note on it.
And I think as well, with the use of social media, it's here all the time, isn't it? So kind of a personal tip from me, if your science communication is work, which for most of us it is, do be aware, if you've got notifications pinging 24/7, just be mindful of that. And
that's true.
Yeah, because it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, can't it? So don't be afraid to log out of social media. Yes, yeah.
Also, a good trick is to build so you can actually plan posts.
Oh, lost you.
I only discovered it like a few times. Yeah, so in Twitter, on Facebook, you can plan it in the future. I didn't know it.
Oh,
you can just plan a post if you're like on holiday for a week.
Other folks are losing Anne. Have we lost Anne's connection? Perhaps.
No.
Oh, she's back.
No, I'm here.
You're back.
No.
You were saying about planning social media, weren't you?
Yeah. So you can actually plan your posts ahead, like 2 weeks, I think. It's really easy.
Yeah, it is good that. Brilliant, thank you. Picking up on a point around building confidence, which I think is really important, and top tips to overcome or cope with anxiety and fear around people looking at you or watching you.
I still have it though. I always flush. But the worst part for me was my PhD defense. So after that, nothing can frighten me. So to be honest, there are worse things than speaking for public. But yeah, it's very. I still have it, and my daughter also has it when she has to give this spreekbeurt for school. Oh my god, there's not much you can do against it. But well, you get used to it after a while.
Recognizing that many people have this fear and anxiety. For me, and I don't know whether this is helpful for anybody else, I think we've probably all been in scenarios and watched speakers talk who are a bit nervous. And as an audience member, watching somebody who is nervous, it makes me feel nervous just as a person. Like I feel for them. I feel for them as a presenter. So for me, thinking about it from the audience's perspective can be helpful. So my heart will probably be beating quite fast inside my chest, but on the surface, I'll probably look quite calm, like, you know, it's all in control. I've got it. It's all good. But that, I think that comes with time as well. And time is useful, practicing as well. I think there's a middle ground of practicing, but not coming across as if you've practiced it loads and loads and loads. And just being able to adapt as well. So yes, there will be hundreds of people watching sometimes. And that's why I made the point about feeling comfortable, but maybe sometimes pushing yourself. Because, you know, before I gave my TEDx talk, I was terrified. But, you know, I knew it would be such a great thing to do, to talk about that. So that's why I wanted to do it. And I think reminding yourself of why you're doing what you're doing can be really helpful in terms of coping. And you've used that nice word, coping with anxiety and fear, because as Anne says, I don't think it ever goes away, does it, Anne? Oh, we've lost Anne, maybe. Yeah, so I don't think it ever goes away. Recognizing that people have it, we all have it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Miriam's asking about science communication in written form. So top tips about maybe a different format of science communication.
Yeah, written form is basically the same. It's like if you have a newspaper article, already in the title, the title has to be provocative, not, but I mean, in a way, it has to be sparking people curiosity, like good title, of course, and then introduction also related to something that is happening now, I think. Yeah, always, if your finding is like something that is very, very specific, but always try to relate it to something that is ongoing. Yeah, the people can, or this and this. Have you ever thought about how, blah, 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 something like that. But for the rest, I mean, there are so many tips and tricks out there. I mean, I would say, if your mother or grandmother understands it, you can have a proofread, then it's a good article, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Do not have your fellow postdocs or students reading it, because it's a different audience. If it's for a general audience, you just have to get a different proofreading.
Yeah, and different forms of even written science communication. So, you know, I've worked with incredible people who write the most wonderful poems about science as well. But I think it does come back to that storytelling. And you mentioned headlines, Anne. You know, what do you want your reader to take away from it? Draw them in, and then tell your story. Picking up on transitioning to science communication jobs. So I'm going to throw this to you, Anne, because you're somebody who's done this.
And it came naturally, organically, it grew. So I was doing, in the end, more science communication than doing my research myself. I still did my research, by the way, but I had like 7,000 students doing research along with me. So I was more selling than my research to papers and to funding. I mean, like if you want grants, you have to write it in an interactive way, right? So, and then I actually realized, I might actually, focus on this. And now I'm doing research management, not only trying to engage the general audience and raising brain awareness, but also, for instance, I'm installing a Scientists Meets Patient program, which is also interesting. It's relating to your clinical experience, Emma. So we're trying to get actually the scientists outside the lab to meet the patients, because sometimes the people are doing, like myself, I was the best example, 14 years in the lab with rodents, but I actually forgot the person behind the dementia. So now I'm doing this Science Meets Patient program, which we also have our scientists meeting the patients on a voluntary basis. And then also the patients themselves are really interested to find out what is now happening. What are the scientists doing to investigate their disorder? So it's really interesting that I'm trying to build like links between scientists and the general public and other stakeholders, also politicians, like very important, of course. So the future of brain research, in my case, I'm writing a white paper at the moment. So it's not about research only, but what institutes can do to solve these societal challenges. It's really broad. But it grew organically. So I couldn't say really like, here I became a science communicator, but it was like something that came naturally, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, I think science communication runs alongside and parallel to my job. So it's something, you know, my lectureship is my main job, and within that I do some science communication. I do some extra bits and pieces as well. So yes, I think, you know, it's selling your skills that you have around those transferable skills as well. A question from Carolina, which is a really interesting question actually, about how narrow or broad to communicate your science. So Carolina says, what would you advise to communicate science outside of your kind of immediate research field? So she's saying, for example, she studies Alzheimer's disease from a bioenergetic point of view. Would you advise against communicating other areas such as brain control of appetite, addiction, and other neuroscience themes?
So Carolina is a woman, I assume. So this is typically some bit of the imposter syndrome and the difference between women and men. If you ask men, they're sometimes very confident about a topic that's not theirs specifically. So sometimes really it's not about being the expert completely in the same field, but you can, if you know enough about it, of course, why not? I think it's not an issue. How can I say this diplomatically? Yeah, you know what I mean? So
it's a hard
sometimes
one, because I think as scientists, we if you're maybe studying for a PhD, you have a really niche specific research question that you're very comfortable with, you know, the inside out, you know that. So for example, my research was in Huntington's disease, and I could have chosen to just speak about Huntington's disease, but actually what I did was I broadened it out. So I speak about the brain quite generally in health and disease. And although things like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease aren't my research area, I know that as a neuroscientist, I have enough knowledge and information to talk about that quite confidently, more than the general public would, perhaps. And also that's a genetic disease, so I'm happy to kind of spin it in a genetics way as well. So for that, Caroline, I'd just say, you know, be aware of what your expert knowledge is, but you will probably have much more knowledge than certainly a general public audience. So do remember that, you know, as scientists, we know so much more than the general public often, but with the caveat of don't ever take on a job that you're not comfortable with. So I sometimes am asked to speak on topics and I think, gosh, you know, I could do some research on that, but actually it's an area that I'm not very confident talking about, so I maybe suggest another speaker who it would be more relevant for.
Yeah, that's
Oh, I think we have lost.
Good comments. The suggestion of other speakers.
Oh, you're back now. Try again.
Yeah, no, I just said that it's a good idea to recommend colleagues that are actually experts in it. Yeah, but sometimes you can really do it sometimes, but you're just too shy and you think you're not capable of. But yeah, that's just what I try to convey, the message that
be confident.
Yeah.
Which relates to Demetrius's question, joining us from Germany today. Hello to you. Asking about overcoming the stress of public speaking, and would we suggest asking for audience feedback?
Audience feedback, yeah, you will see it if they're falling asleep or if they don't get an applause in the end, of course. But I mean, if it's now a virtual meeting, you can see it if people are leaving the lecture. You can actually ask for audience feedback. It's a good idea. Like explicitly ask which part did you like, or how was the language used, something like this. Like, was it understandable? How was the flow? It's a good idea. Yeah.
I think I'd backtrack a bit more and say maybe select a group of trusted friends, family, colleagues to give you some feedback initially. And also a top tip from me, which is something that is mortifying when you first do it, is to record yourself speaking. And it is horrible when you first do it, because you will critique yourself and you'll think, I sound really strange and I look odd. Well, I did when I recorded myself, but you'll learn so much from it in terms of your posture and the speed of the things that you're saying. So I would recommend recording yourself, because then you are your audience, right? But it is very cringeworthy initially, but that's what I would say. So a question around generating ideas on a weekly basis for a science blog while keeping it engaging. So blogging.
Oof, yeah, it's a lot of investment, eh? Yeah, indeed.
Weekly is very.
I would say, yeah. As a journalist, still in my background, I read a lot of newspapers and magazines. So I always found something interesting every day, or at least every week, that I can blog about or mention in my Twitter. Yeah, so it's this curiosity. Yeah, you will find science everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult if science communication isn't your main job and you're saying a weekly basis, and that's good, but you know, don't put too much pressure on yourself, because weekly is quite common, like quite regular. And also, just to let you know, there is a workshop at the FENS regional meeting that aims to allow participants to develop further their science communication projects with some real hands-on mentoring experience. So check out the FENS website and for more information on that. Oh gosh, so many questions. I'm sorry, we've got 5 minutes left and we're not going to be able to answer them all, so I'm sorry in advance, but please do contact us afterwards if you do have any specific questions. But I'll just pick up on a few more. Maria's question about the context of unplanned science communication. How do you approach a reluctant audience? How do you bring them to a stand? Well, at least they will listen. So how do you draw them in?
Oh, this is difficult. Unplanned science communication. So you think you're... Can you give me an example? Because it's really hard, Emma.
Well, you gave some really nice examples about stands, Anne. So maybe if you're running a stand, there's nothing worse is there being stood at a stand and everybody's walking by, kind of politely looking, but not coming to see you. So you had a nice chalk.
Yeah.
I think there's nice stuff you can do around demonstrations, asking questions as well, maybe.
Yeah, that's true. Or putting up a video board, like when there's something playing, an animation. Maybe a bubble blower, something like this, to attract their attention. I don't know. It's really difficult. But in this case, they already paid for the science festival. So in a way, they wanted to really do the workshop.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I think what makes you different as well. And it's bringing a crowd in, maybe not even advertising it as science, right? So I think
that's true.
Saying, I'm running a science event, that is sometimes a barrier for the general public. So, you know, I'm running this event.
Correct.
You know, you mentioned bubbles or, you know, lights. It's a bit gimmicky, maybe. But yeah, I think it's about talking to people as people as well. You know, you've got to remember your audience are people. So if that's a story, something that appeals to their own beliefs, then I think, you know, or what kind of drives us. And it's stories, it's that personal element. Just picking up on a question about the importance, oh gosh, it's this bit, of communicating failure in science, and a follow-up to that, communicating other people's work.
Yeah, like I said before, people have to recognize that science is a process. We don't have all the answers. And I always say it when I end my talk, that we're doing our best to find solutions for Alzheimer's disease. And it's like, you have to give them a perspective, of course. You want to have a positive note in the end, but you have to be honest, of course. And also discussing other people or fellow scientists' work is also sometimes tricky. I think
in terms of other people's work, you know, just be honest about it. You know, just be open, honest. You know, if there's an opportunity to recommend other people, if you had a request that, you know, wasn't your immediate area of expertise, but you had a colleague, work together. You know, it should be that team science approach and that recognition that, you know, you might be the one communicating this piece of work, but actually there's a group of 10, 15, 20 people behind that. And I'm just going to pick up on the final question around, and it's a big one, and we've only got maybe 30 seconds left. So sorry about that, Anne. How do we combat fake science?
Excuse me, how do we
combat fake science?
Fake science? Yeah. So you mean like pseudoscientists?
Yeah.
Yeah, last week, so when I gave, last month when I gave my workshop about for Brain Awareness Week, it was about therapies for Alzheimer's disease, and in the end, in the Q&A, there were some people indeed like going to, this, do you know this substance and this oil and this, is it useful? So it's very tricky, and I had to close the chat there. So, but always try to go for dialogue, I think. You don't have to convince people, also like now with the anti-vaxxers movement, but I would always show at least some curiosity and try to go into dialogue with them. But if it's really clear that they're there to harm you, or like if it's like really it's nonsense, you should leave the room, I think, if it's possible, because otherwise you will get caught in a fight where you can never win.
Yeah,
sorry.
Absolutely great, thank you. I can't believe it, but our time is up, unfortunately. We have had our 90 minutes. So apologies to those of you whose questions we didn't get to answer. But on the screen, our contact details, if you do want to ask us any questions. Just a reminder, this webinar is part of the FENS Friday series, and we've got more webinars coming up. Pasted in the chat is that regional meeting information that I mentioned, and if you do want any other of the brilliant webinars or resources that FENS organises, please do visit the fens.org website. Finally, just to say thank you again to the Dana Foundation for supporting today's webinar. Thank you, Anne, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's been
Emma.
great. Thank you to all of our great colleagues in the FENS office who are busy behind the scenes, making sure everything runs really smoothly. And finally, thank you to all of you for joining us today and getting involved and asking us these questions. So good luck in your science communication endeavours. We hope you found this webinar useful, and hopefully, we will see you at some other FENS events. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Bye. Have a nice Friday.